And as far as business with the USA is concerned, in light of the business advisory statement on investment that was released, and then the business advisory statement against Uganda. Now, the backbone of it is that the Departments of State, Labor, Health and Human Services, Commerce and the U.S. Agency for International Development issued a business advisory on Uganda. The advisory informs U.S. businesses, it informs individuals and other U.S. persons, including health services providers, members of academic institutions, investors, of potential risks they may face if they are conducting or contemplating to conduct business in Uganda, as noted in the 2023 Investment Climate Statement. Officials frequently engage in corrupt practices with impunity, and many corruption cases have been pending for years, henceforth threatening Uganda's investment growth potential and climate and economic upgrade. Now, to expand more on this, we do have the experts on economics, Uganda and international, to give us their perspective on the matter. We are joined by Dr. Fred Muhumuza, who's an economist. Good morning to you, Doctor.
Good morning. How are you today? And you was out there.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
We also do have Mr. Richard Ssempala, who's an economist, joining us for this discussion. Good morning to Mr. Ssempala.
Well, good morning to you and viewers out there.
Okay, all right. So let me start with you, Doctor. So this advisory suggests that American enterprises could actually be exposed to unspecified financial and reputational risks. What are those financial and reputational risks that we're talking about?
It's quite an interesting advisory. And as they have said, it has no legal implications on their company, but it can have legal implications. Because America has what they call a Foreign Corruption Act. If you engage in corruption out there, you can be held liable for that corruption in the US. And if some companies are engaging other companies that are engaged in corruption, you know, Americans have a way of enforcing their laws across the globe, and you can't take that away from them. So some people might say, but we don't have American companies in Uganda. But your reputation can be affected. Now, a company based in the UK or Philippines or Malaysia can come and do corruption in Uganda. Now, that company can lose business in the US, can even be fined in the US. So this advisory goes beyond American companies, because they would say you are doing business in the US worth $100 million. But this business now has a reputation of the corruption that you did when you had a $1 million business in Uganda. So you begin to say, is this corruption here worthwhile? So because of those relations, you want to take serious this advisory they are giving to their countries. I know Ugandans may reach out to there and say this is to do with anti-homosexuality. I've read the text, real anti-homosexuality is like 5%
They're
of the
flipping
text.
The script.
Anti-homosexuality is 5% of the text. There are a number of issues they are raising here which are significant for Uganda to handle. They are talking of things where, and of course the disadvantage, you are warning your own countries with African free continental trade area. For example, they highlight that. We agreed on it in 2018. It was supposed to start in 2021. This is 2023. We are still negotiating. So they are advising their companies. And I know Ugandans who have literally fallen into this trap of lacking such advisory. We were told oil is flowing in 2012, 2017, 2022. And there are Ugandans who came ahead and invested. And they have burnt their fingers. So some of the things they are warning about is Africa. We all looked forward when the Africa Free Continental Trade Area is coming. People are rushing in to invest in Africa. Africa is a new kid on the block. They are warning them to say, watch a minute, wait a minute, and watch. Some of these statements are simply rhetoric. Some of these, the realities are not there. So they are warning their countries, I mean their firms, to be mindful of those kinds of behaviors. You might lose money in Uganda because you come and the ground is not level, because others have to bribe and get in. And I think they are very, very specific, bribing high-level government officials. Because I know some people always want to trick the situation and say, you know, corruption takes two
to tango.
To tango. You the one who is paying. You know, here they are very
specific.
Very specific on government officials. Because I mean, the other person paying a bribe, if this is the only option they have been given, they want to do business. You want to get that thing off, because for you, a private person, if you don't disclose it today, you are out of it. And somebody standing in before you is saying, unless you do this.
Unless you're willing to give me 30%.
So you're looking at all these kinds of dynamics, but also it has significant ramifications as well. The president, I think, has mentioned and said with Jagali, I think we were cheated. I saw him talking about the fertilizer factory somewhere. There's a Chinese person. Recently there was another Chinese, I think, who was cheated and robbed. Now, these are messages for America. It's now warning its own business people to say Uganda is having very good, they really list good things. But they said despite those good things, watch out as you do your business. It can harm you, you can lose money, but also your reputation. There are people who don't want to deal with a corrupt entity.
Okay, Mr. Ssempala, when it comes to businesses, Doctor here has given us the perspective and the impact to, U.S. concerned businesses, citizens, personnel, and enterprises. What's the reverse of this business advisory statement on Uganda and the investment climate? Given to the light that the spokesperson of government says, anyway, after all, there are not that many US-based enterprises and businesses being conducted in Uganda compared to other foreign investors.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Richard Ssempala. I'm happy to discuss the topic with my senior here. We're all from Makerere University. Well, America being a global economy, so has implication. Even if, well, our officials are saying that it's not our major trade partner, but also it sends a signal. So in this, I look at it as a precursor for the businesses that can be undertaken in Uganda. So as Dr. Muhumuza has indicated, that yes, we might not do a lot with them. Yeah, because even that document, they indicate countries where we have double taxation agreement with, so where most of those investors coming from instead of USA. But at domestic level, you see that if the signals are not well captured, then we are likely to lose. So a person dealing in trading in Uganda, looking at what US is really suggesting, then you can really fall back and say, instead of taking my money where there is corruption, then maybe I can look out for other countries. So it's just a precursor that we need to really take into consideration, that if things continue as they are, as those guys have indicated in their document, then things are likely not to do well, especially where we are trying to invite more people to come and trade in the country through foreign direct investments.
And that's where the president is right now, Dr. Muhumuza. He's having as much engagements with international communities to interest them in investing in Uganda. While this is US for people that are directly, affiliated with the USA, it does speak to the other investment communities and countries out there. It does paint a picture for them on what is happening in Uganda, which presents us with a challenge. And so before we go there, when we look at the business climate and the investment climate for us in Uganda, is it good enough? Is it stable enough for anyone to actually come and have and conduct fair business?
I think as you read the advisory, but also our own Ugandans here have raised these issues. So it's not just the advisor, and as you rightly noted, this is not about American businesses. Every other potential investor in Uganda is going to read this, because there are many whose countries are not able to give such advisory to their people. So others will read it. But also America has been bold enough to put it out there. I've had conversations in boardrooms with potential and actual investors in Uganda who raise these same issues. One of the companies I can't mention, about 5 years ago, they said, well, we have suspended our $5 million investment in Uganda because of, and they listed a number of things. Now, this was 2 years after the suspension.
And on the list, you had corruption amongst what?
You have corruption. You have all these sorts of policies that are not coordinated, I would say. And these are some of the things being raised here. You've come to invest here. Some of the raw materials, Uganda doesn't have them. So you're importing them. Then you wake up one morning and everybody says, local content must be 30%. And you begin to enforce that even when Uganda hasn't built a capacity. Now we have a case of industrial sugar. We were told Kinyara was supposed to provide it. The Ugandan investors themselves here are crying they can't find industrial sugar. Kinyara has failed them. And you have already enforced, you put taxes, you put blockades, you put... So those disruptions are a concern of Ugandans themselves, much as they are a concern of the American government of its own citizens. And you don't want to also simply look at and say, but there are not many investors here. America still remains one of the biggest foreign direct injectors, if I can put it that way. The American government still puts a lot of money into Uganda as a government. Part of this is actually run through American companies. Now they are complaining about taxation, which cuts across. If you're making money and you're picking money, there is a withholding. If you're earning money in Uganda, withholding tax of 15%. And then there is a VAT of 18%. If you're sourcing some of the inputs from foreign, say, telecom companies or IT service providers, and some of these are using softwares that are domiciled outside Uganda. Now you can't net this off your cost as a VAT refund or anything. Now, those are raising costs, even for some of the Ugandans who are dealing with some of these service providers that are outside the country. Now, that's your investment climate. But quite often when we are discussing investment climate, we deal with the hardware. A railway line is needed here, electricity transmission is needed here. No, that's not what makes a...
we have provided...
A building is not what makes a hotel.
We have provided a park.
It is the comfort I find in that Serena room that makes that hotel. It's not that big... hard infrastructure. So the investment climate in Uganda is really not in there when you get to that detail. I've seen industrialists here who are saying, look at this power. It is fluctuating. I cannot now even run my factory, my business. The other day we were in a conference in Makerere, we had power, everything is connected, but they were running a generator outside the room. And I asked these communication people, I said, why are we running a generator there? They said, anytime that power can go off, anytime it fluctuates. We have sensitive equipment here. So me and you, we're just using a laptop or charging a phone. You may not feel that pain of a real industry where a slight fluctuation in power affects his entire mix of input that he has done. He loses all that process. So the investment climate needs a zooming in. It's not just about an industrial park in Gulu, in Soroti, in Mbale. It is these software details of, can I get my thing out? Veneer, you're having this conversation the other day. I mean, the president says no export of unprocessed timber. Some people's containers were already at Malaba. Others were headed to Malaba. And then we say no export. Now people have containers stuck on this side of the border. They are paying damage where the trucks are parked. You had hired this truck for 2 weeks. Or one week, knowing it will be in Mombasa and offloaded, I hand it over back to the owner. Now for a whole month, your cargo is here on this truck, you up. These are the kinds of things that are disrupting the business signal. And America is communicating to its people, you might lose money, you might lose reputation. I think whatever reasons we have, we can also do some self-reflection, and there are issues we'll find that are genuine for us to resolve.
Okay. Mr. Ssempala, in light of what Dr. here has referred to, there seems to be a lot of double standardization across different bars that are supplementary or supposed to be complementary in aiding a suitable business investment environment for Uganda. What are those in particular, and where do you see the conflict coming through? For example, there's a trade ministry here, then there's investment authority here, then there's the office of the president here with its directives that are endless, so, you know, then there are those people back end or backdoor opportunities that come through. So how are we supposed to harness a good business climate, and what are the rightful economic parts of that?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, basically in business we look at the cost of production, and within the cost of production, yeah, you also look at the costs you will incur even to produce this good or output. So where we have really those so many institutions, and in some cases these institutions sometimes they do duplicate what the other one is doing, and I think that's why recently people talk about merging some of these institutions and bodies. It's a cost to government, to taxpayer, and even to people who have to do business. So in areas where you see that there are double standards, then that is a negative. It's a cost to the person who's coming to do a business here in Uganda. So a good path would be that instead of having these seemingly institutions doing the same work, would align. Yes, investment authority has talked about one-stop center where an investor can really do everything all together. But you see that there are also other contrary bodies also coming up. See, the Office of President has institutions, then you have the PDP, and then so many other institutions, the free zone area, and you see that are doing almost the same work. So if we are to really encourage business and then work on favorable climate for investment, then we need to be really sure that our investors, we want their money, right? Yes, they have the resources, even the technologies, we need it. And also creating employment opportunities for our people, unemployed youth, and so many others, in addition to getting more revenues. So we need to put the environment clear, work on the issues that have been raised by US, including the tax regime, regressive tax regime, and also controlling the corruption. You know, corruption has so many negative implications. I was reading one of the pieces that were written by Wayne 29. Then it was like, the more you have corrupt tendencies in your countries, then the less investment in terms of foreign direct investments you will have as a country. So US is trying to tell us that please work on these areas, otherwise investors, even if not in US, even others will also move away. Yet we need these people to really boost our economy.
Okay, all right. Dr. Muhumuza, this comes in light of the fact that most recently we did have the World Bank suspension of future loan applications. Now we do have this business advisory statement. I think it speaks of a lot of pressure for us. A bigger question is, why at such a point as now is the US turning economic guns on Uganda's economic development?
I think they're turning the guns on us, but as I've said and before you question the fellow who lit the matchbox to burn the grass next to you, first ask who brought the grass. Because this guy took advantage of some exposure. And this is really a good connection. And that's why some political economic aspects need to be brought in. But we possibly have exposed ourselves to give them leverage. You're like running with loose clothing, and eventually something is going to pull you down from your race. Avoid those encumbrances. The US literally appoints the president of the World Bank. So you begin to try and make connections here and say, are there connections? Can I win this? Can I not win this? So while we are discussing with the World Bank about the suspension, you need to say, but the US appoints the president of the World Bank, literally. So if the US is sending this advisory, and in this advisory are issues of human rights, are issues of anti-homosexuality, so what are my chances of winning the conversation I am having with the World Bank? Because the World Bank will be reading this statement also saying, hey, my appointing authority or my supervisor or one of my major players, and these are global politics, you don't want to wash it away. But we play in that global politics. I hear people say, we are sovereign. Yes, man, you are sovereign, but you are a small, tiny, open economy in a global space. The Palestinians didn't want to walk to school today. But there are bombs raining all over their cities. So they just can't go there. You can't ignore some of these realities. So that connection comes in to say, can this affect our current negotiations with the World Bank? They mentioned the extended credit facility we have from the IMF. And thank you, IMF, you've really helped us in this. I don't know after COVID and possibly whatever the events came through after COVID and during COVID, where we would be with our shilling, where our economy would be without this injection and support from the IMF. But part of it, we haven't made the deal. We were supposed to be spending part of this into health and education. Now, any employer, going back to the advisory, any employer loses a lot of money out of your employees not concentrating because they have issues to do with health and education of their family members. So if Uganda doesn't improve health and education, the warning comes through to every employer that you may not get the best out of your employees if their family members have health and education issues. That's why some companies actually offer medical insurance to the employee and immediate family. It's not that they love your children and husband or wife whom they don't even know.
So that they care so much about
you. No, but they know if your child is sick and you have to look for money because the government health system is not working, your productivity on this job is going to be compromised. So we need to get back and say, what are we doing? And I hear people talking, PDM is about giving people money. No, fourth pillar in PDM is health and education. And one of the IMF conditionalities was we are supporting you, want to see you improve health and education. The same corruption is affecting health and education. So I think before we say who is lighting the matchstick, who has brought the dry grass? It looks like it ourselves.
Okay.
And we need to address that.
All right, so we're looking at double policy, you're looking at duplication, you're looking at corruption, you're looking at the tax regime, among so many other things that come out of this advisory statement. And of course, in light of what has been shared with us with Doctor, that the USA literally appoints the World Bank presidency. When we come back from the short break, we're also going to look at the International Monetary Fund and the extended credit facility. And
at NTV.
Well, thank you so much for still being with us. It's our Kickstarter, and we're looking at the impact of the U.S. Business Advisory Statement on investment here in Uganda. In depth, I am joined by Mr. Richard Ssempala, who's an economist, alongside Dr. Fred Muhumuza, equally one who is helping us build or rebuild this economy post-COVID-19. Now, speaking of rebuilding, we do have, we were talking about the World Bank earlier.
Yes.
Now, when we look at the International Monetary Fund, for which also we have to put into consideration in this conversation, we look at some monies that we are meant to be getting from them. We got the first batch of about $258 million US. That was in June 2021. The second batch of $125 million US came through last year around March, and now the IMF has approved another batch of $240 million US. That was of December 2022, but now this money has to come through. However, terms and conditions do apply for the government. For these monies to actually be released, there's got to be implementation of reforms, increasing social spending, ensuring debt sustainability, and of course improving governance. And corruption is also under those conditions. Dr. Fred, is Uganda performing equally as good on these conditions that were given by IMF in order to receive these extended credit facility?
I think you can read through, and anybody can really judge. You want to put the facts on the table for people to look through. If the Americans are still raising issues of corruption and governance, and they were part of this extended credit facility, then you have a problem. That you possibly, IMF is being kind to us because they are looking at broader pictures. They could have said you haven't met your part of the bargain, but maybe they are looking at the efforts we are making and saying, well, some things may not just walk away within a short time. They are making some efforts, so let's limp on with them and let's continue to support. Because without this support of the IMF, you'd have a problem. And don't forget that, as we said, America really literally appoints the president on the World Bank side. Europe does that for the IMF. So the IMF will also be reading, but they have tried to help us, and this is drawing down really. I think we are left to about 130 billion of this extended credit facility. I don't know what terms they will have for the next discussion because we still need that. Our reserves really have been supported by the IMF. Our currency, the strength it has, the IMF has played a very key role because we know exports went down during COVID, and post-COVID prices went up. And they significantly went up to the extent that about a year ago, reserves of $3.6 billion, we are giving us 3.3 months of exports, because this is how we measure them. It's not just the money you have there. Like, if I was to go out there and buy money using my reserves, how many months can I sustain before they dry out? So about a year ago, 3.6 billion would give us 3.3 months. Now, the same 3.3 months, you need 3.9 billion. So you need more reserves to do exactly the same thing that you were doing 1 year ago, because of the surge in increase in export prices. Our export revenues responded that much and that fast to cover us there. So you still need the IMF in your house. And if IMF is raising some of the issues, you want this conversation. There Uganda, we're sovereign. Yes, you're sovereign. But when you're growing in a jungle space, lions will eat you up. You want to be listening to that cupboard on the tree, which warns you about which lion and cheetah is hiding in the bush, because the bird can see it.
That cock in the morning,
that cock in the morning
you have to wake up and
sometimes
do your due diligence.
Sounds of chicken would help us know there is a snake in that place. So you want to be playing in that space with everybody else. So are we doing well? Are we building debt sustainability? I'm still concerned about our debt.
Speaking of debt sustainability, Mr. Ssempala, when it comes to that element of sustaining our debts, where do we stand? Is it working out for us? Seemingly all the money is coming in, 99% of it is going to clear debts and not to attend to, you know, the issues that cause development for Uganda.
Yeah, well, about the debt, I think we are at about 81 trillion as of now. So it implies that if we are to clear it today, every Ugandan has to at least pay more than 1 million shilling if we are to clear it to zero. But the implication of debt sometimes is on how we use it, because even on personal level, people do borrow. Yeah, everyone borrows, but we look at how prudent you use these monies. So when we speak about debt sustainability, we look at the commodities we sell out that can help us to earn those dollars to repay our debt. So if we are still struggling with the exports we have, then the monies we earn from that, then there is a big question. But also where we invest these monies. So when US talk about corruption, and we see that people sometimes take these monies out, you steal money and then you take them out, or others even invest in unproductive ventures. I call them unproductive. Find one building a house of about 20 bedrooms, all for what? Right? So if this money is maybe invested in sectors where more employment can be created, or even the government can earn more revenue, then that could be a viable, but in a sense corruption is bad, and I don't encourage it. So if we talk about debt sustainability, we should look at where we invest our monies from. Recently we've been investing so much in infrastructure. We know what happened during the rain season. Katonga was washed away. So we have to invest again. So the quality
and the very infrastructure you're talking about here, we have projects under USMID that are not being completed. So one, money is not being released, or the contractors are doing shoddy work. So on either side, there's backlog of what is supposed to be done. Yeah,
sometimes even we invest, we borrow before we are ready to use these monies, and we really pay commitment fees. All that really increase the cost of our debt. So from the prevailing environment, you see that we are not yet there to really say that our debt is sustainable enough.
Okay, all right, Dr. Muhumuza, talk to us about the debt sustainability indicators when it comes to the grace periods also that we do have on some of these loans. What will be the repercussions and all the renegotiations for that matter?
I think we've reached a time where we need to face it and do restructuring of our debt formally and officially. Though some people fear that, because the debt sustainability indicators would want to say debt to GDP, and then they will refer to those things. Those things really don't add value to the conversation of whether you're sustainable. Because if you are refinancing your debt, you're now doing unilateral restructuring. You've not even talked to your lenders. So somebody who lent us money 10 years ago and wanted his money now, or her money now, and you're saying, I don't have it, but can I give it to you later? And you have not had a formal conversation with this person. Now, what rate are they going to book in for this new rollover? You could have negotiated that rate down, but this person will quickly say, give me the current rate. They might have lent to you at 12%. Now they are going to take advantage of the 16% where you are today. So restructuring, of course, will mean your debt maybe is not sustainable, because that's the implication once you restructure debt. That's the first signal. But if you are restructuring unilaterally and quietly, then you are missing out an opportunity of getting you to a sustainable level. I've been reading the report by the Ministry of Finance, and they really generate some of this information. But I think at times we don't use it well. The September report on performance of the economy is very clear. The money we borrowed in 2022-2023, the financial year that ended, about 70% of it went into debt refinancing. So you're actually borrowing to pay debt. The money we borrowed September, which is last month, almost 100% of it went into debt refinancing. Now you can't begin to walk and say, my debt is sustainable, when you've been pushed to those limits. That even when you borrow money domestically, it is going into balancing the boat, as young people would say. Then when are you going to improve the health services? When are you going to improve the educational services, which employers are watching, which is part of the IMF lending? And the IMF, thanks again to them, they gave us a grace period, 5 years. So we begin to pay this obligation around 2025. But we are supposed to finish it in 5 years. Now that is going to run to our reserves. So I'm already looking at that and saying, our reserves strong enough to clear that debt trigger repayment that's going to come in within another year or two, and still sustain these other things we want to be talking about. So your debt sustainability should not be looked at in a static mode, that I'm sustainable in 2023. No, your debt is lying in future. Your sustainability, and sometimes we compute the net present value, but the net present value has a lot of assumptions that Ukraine will not be attacked, China will continue financing us, my infrastructure will come through, my corruption. Our own corruption is undermining the very project supposed to give us the thrust to pay back this debt. So I want really everybody to open up their scope, and we're trying to do this at the Makerere University Business Economics Forum, jointly with partners, because we're a small entity, but we really want to hold conversations. So we have meetings and conversations, and I'm looking forward, we shall soon have another economic summit with NTV, to have these conversations of what are the issues, both for the private sector to listen, because for us we give advisory to the Ugandan private sector, like the Americans are giving to their own. We want to give advisory to the Ugandan private sector, but also advice to the government to say, how do we make this economy conducive for investors? Both current and future.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Muhumuza. Now, Mr. Ssempala, you did also mention of the tax regime mentioned in that advisory statement by the U.S. Where do we stand? What exactly were the direct points on the tax regime, and what are the solutions for us?
Yeah, well, tax regimes, well, as I indicated earlier, that a tax is a cost of production. So you have to pay if you engage in any business. Yeah, those guys were really specific, pointed out to those countries where our country has the leeway, favorable conditions, we call them double taxation agreements. For instance, South Africa and so many other countries, that when you make the monies in Uganda, so you can be taxed at a reduced rate, withhold tax over 15% or less. So tax regimes can help if they are favorable to boost business in your country, but if they are not, then they deter away the investors, the would-be investors in your country. That's why we see that we have many investors coming from such countries where the favorable tax regimes are in place. We've signed them with treaties and so many other things. So a tax is a cost. if we are to invite these guys to come, then we need to be at least cooperative, that even these taxes don't really affect the would-be domestic investors. Don't favor a lot the foreigners, but also take into consideration those people we have in the country.
Okay. All right, so there, of course, there's some comments that are coming through. We'll be engaging with them later on. Some people asking now, if money is pulled out of the economy, what is left for Ugandans to chew on? But before we get into that, we can't have this conversation of investment without talking about the Bank of Uganda. Looking at the foreign direct investment having increased from 1.4 billion, to 1.4 billion in 2022, from 911 million in 2021. You see this growth is being influenced by the oil sector project-related spending. And you mentioned, Doctor, about 2025, which seems to be very prospectus for us, Uganda. And so we're looking at the pre-oil investment averaging $2 billion annually until we realize our first oil in 2025. With that ongoing situation, does it change the mathematical projection for us in Uganda?
Yeah, you want to factor it in, and I really like the central bank's approach to things, because economy is about expectations. Nobody invests without looking forward. So if the people who have ramped up this FDI into the oil sector, they are really coming into the rigs. The bulk of it is in the rigs. But remember, oil doesn't make money for you until it is in the market. The market is not in Bulisa. The market is not in Moya. The market is not in Chibali. The market is out there. So these guys may come in on the assumption and expectation that there's going to be progress on the pipeline. So they came in and increased this investment in 2022 because there were good messages on the pipeline. Now you want to now understand what is happening with the pipeline. Do we see progress on it? You're talking about 1,445 kilometers of a pipeline. You're talking about possibly 420, 450 days left to 2025, because we have a whole 2024 intact, and about 80 days on this month, on this year. Are we going to do 3 kilometers per day on that pipeline to get to 2025? These are expectations of these investors. So whether they continue investing and bringing in the billions, it will be conditional to that. And you want to say, how far have we gone with that conversation? The signals that side are not very right, and these are the expectations people will be looking at. But also the other part about taxation, as we say, taxation is futuristic. Ricardo is one of those economists who said, when a country borrows heavily, investors know that that country is going to tax heavily to pay that debt. And if it fails to find that tax, then that country will even have a problem maintaining the very infrastructure that has brought me in. So investors look forward. I'm not bringing $50 million in Uganda to get it back in 2 years. I want to be here for 30 years. So they're looking at that entire horizon. And that's why the American advisor also touches on our succession planning. Because the investor coming in Uganda today will settle out to live Museveni's era. But he's wondering who comes in. Is there going to be another land decree, made in 1972? Is Uganda going to be Libya? Is Uganda going to be Tanzania? Okay. So those are expectations, and you want to play in that space. So everybody needs to be engaging that and saying, how does this affect us? And when there is capital flight, as people are asking, when money is leaving, Uganda really has given very good environment. You can bring in your money, you can take out your money. But we know when you bring in your money, you leave it here if you find it favorable. Okay. So I should be focusing on how do I make it favorable? And that has been Uganda's approach.
And so, Mr. Ssempala, how do we make it favorable? Giving your closing remarks on this subject, how do we make the business environment favorable for both domestic and foreign investments?
The US has put it really right. They have indicated some of the areas which even they theme that if worked on, the environment here will be favorable. Work on corruption. It's a cost to doing business, right? So work on aggregate demand, right? In production, you can't produce where people won't really consume your commodities. Empower people to consume the commodities. We do that by investing in productive sectors. have them employed, have them live better ways, then they will be able to really consume even these commodities which the investors are willing to invest in.
Okay, all right. Dr. Muhumuza, we are working on the corruption, honestly. In office of the president, now they duplicated the anti-corruption unit and have now created the anti-corruption unit specifically for investment.
Yes.
So we are doing some efforts. What's your reaction to that, and what are the efforts is government sincerely doing to actually give us a wonderful business climate in Uganda?
I think we are doing all these things, but this statement says it is more of rhetoric than action. That for me was a very, very outstanding statement out there. And to my fellow academics, because we also included in the statement, they're also warning those who are supposed to partner with. Knowledge is very important. Information can be useful. We survived COVID because the people in the medical world did their part. They generated the information we needed to survive COVID. So if this statement is really touching on academics, my colleagues at the Makerere University Business School, School of Economics, and elsewhere, those who are in the research of generating knowledge, can we sustain this, and so that we are not listed among those who are being warned? Because we need American support to generate the knowledge that is needed to help people say, even in an environment of corruption, how does corruption affect business? That connection, many times simply say, corruption is okay. Every country is corrupt. No, there is not okay. But because people do not understand all these linkages that corruption has with other business environment. The potholes in Kampala, who knows? Somewhere I cannot rule out some corruption, either of today or of those years. Same thing with the potholes across the road. A lot of road network is really going down. And we'll agree that without roads, we cannot move this economy. But now we have reached a level. We invested billions of dollars into roads and into electricity. Now we cannot sustain the roads. Do we go back to borrow? China is no longer available. The money they used to ramp in here, it has all gone down. And it's not coming back given the new dynamics. So how are we going to sustain the economy? We need this knowledge out there so that we can inform the president's efforts to say the efforts you are doing to ramp out corruption and deal with corruption should go beyond rhetoric. Let action be seen.
Okay.
I was seeing this ruling on the bicycles. It has taken so long. 2014, this is 2023. Most of the people involved are so afraid that you can't even take them to prison. So how fast are we dealing off with the court backlog of cases on corruption and other things? Because these affect investors.
All right. So at the end of the day, this U.S. business advisory statement is touching on labor, it's touching on health, it's touching on human services. In particular, U.S. persons conducting any form of business here, including health service providers, members of the academic institutions, and also investors. And it touches Dr. Fred Muhumuza here a lot. But foreign investment is actually a current sweetheart for Uganda. However, the government's actions do not always align with the rhetoric, closing of political and democratic spaces, the poor economic management. We cannot talk about the endemic corruption, the growing sovereign debt, the weak rule of law, the growing calls of protectionism of some senior policy makers and government officials, but also government's failure to continuously, substantially invest in health and education sectors to create that environment that is safe enough for labor to thrive and investment to grow for us. So the question is, are we making a bed of roses for us to sleep in, or to just look at and say, wow, that bed looks very nice? That can only be answered by, you know, the policymakers and those that are supposed to be harnessing a good, conducive business investment environment for both local investment and foreign investment. That marks the end of this conversation. We'll be right back with TechNote.